Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and today is the day that I am finally going to be casting Rune. If you're new to my channel, this is the custom ball-jointed doll head that I spent the past several years working on. It's my first time sculpting, really, and my very first time trying to make something like a doll head, so while he's a little imperfect, there are a lot of reasons that I'm taking this step now. I've started the preparation by priming the doll well with rust-oleum automotive primer, which is my favorite, and I'm preparing the head for casting by creating dams that will block the silicone during production of the mold. I'm using plasticine clay, blocking off the eye holes and the hole in the neck where the S-hook will go to hold the head onto the doll's body. Unfortunately, the filming of this molding and casting process isn't super complete because I had a lot of technical problems recording, and I'm starting to think it might be time to begin saving to replace my DSLR, but that's something I'll talk about some other time. You can see that at this point there are still some places that are a bit bumpy on the doll, and that I haven't done things like drill out holes for magnets, but I promise I have reasons for deciding to go ahead and cast the doll even though it isn't 100% perfect, and I'll try to explain those along the way. I spent a lot of time considering how I wanted to do the mold for this doll since my previous mold making attempts didn't always go smoothly. But I've been able to take everything I learned from those previous attempts and bring that information together for this project. In addition to the dams, I also glue coffee straws to the tops of the doll's ears. These will create vents to let air bubbles out of the mold when the resin is poured. One clip that got lost was filling the rest of the top of the head with plasticine clay. When I placed him flat top down inside this cardboard sleeve for the mold, the head is completely filled already, and the straws are embedded in little balls of clay to keep them from filling up with silicone when I pour. This also creates keys that will help me line up the mold later on. From what I've seen, most doll makers use water-clear silicone for their molds, but after reading a lot of reviews, I felt those weren't the best option for me since I don't have vacuum chambers for mold making or pressure pots for casting. I needed something that would give me clean, low-bubble molds without those, and I've previously had great results with Umu 30 silicone, so that's what I used. The cardboard sleeve was hot glued shut so there would be no leaks, and I made it oval to keep it as efficient as possible. I didn't have anywhere good to set up my camera for this, but after I started pouring the silicone, I used a cheap paintbrush to make sure the nose, ears, and mouth were completely coated with no bubbles before I finished filling the mold. The next day, I opened the cardboard sleeve and removed the clay from the inside of the head without removing the head from the mold. The clay left an imprint in the silicone that's really lumpy and bumpy, but that's not a problem because it'll help keep the mold fitting exactly where I need it to be without any additional keys. To prepare the mold for the top half being poured, I coated every crevice and every bit of exposed silicone inside the doll's eyes and neck with petroleum jelly, since I had horrible results with spray-on mold release previously. I also coated the top edge of the outside of the mold because this would cling to the cardboard frame with a tight seal and prevent silicone from seeping down the sides. Before the frame goes back on, I added 2 pieces of clay to the top of the head. One wider triangular piece that will be the pour spout, and one round peg that will just be a vent for air to escape. These are pressed up against the side of the silicone to the best of my ability, but if silicone does seep behind these, it won't matter if it gets cut or torn, because these parts are just for pouring resin. I wrapped the cardboard sleeve back around the mold and used rubber bands to hold it in place while I glued the sides shut, then rubber banded thoroughly so it would be secure when I poured the next half of the mold. Another thing I wasn't able to record due to camera problems was the preparation of the head cap mold, but that's basically just the head cap being mashed into a block of clay, so I pour over the dome first. You'll get to see more of that later. Then I poured the top half of the head mold. My straws ended up not being quite as tall as they needed to be, but that's okay, because I can always cut those vents open on the top of the mold later. One full day to cure, and then the head mold is finished and can be peeled open. The cardboard was softened a lot by the silicone, but honestly I was really surprised by how well it worked, and I had no leaks from this mold. I stuck with using petroleum jelly as a mold release because I had tested it with an older mold for eyes and it worked well, and I heated it up after brushing it on so that all of the brush strokes disappeared. I tried to do the opening super carefully to ensure nothing would tear if it was stuck, so that took a minute, and there were a few places that the mold did stick together that I had to tear through, but it wasn't too bad. The inside of the head mold looks really strange, but it fits well, and that's all that matters. More technical difficulties meant I had a lot of corrupted footage and stuff that flat out didn't record when it said it was recording, so you don't get to see me remove the master from the mold, but I guess that just means extra suspense for the end. So instead, I'll explain these rubber bands on the mold. While I was able to get the master out of the mold without damage to the ears on the master or the mold, I wasn't confident in my ability to get a release agent into the ears while the opening was so small, so I ended up cutting zigzag lines down the side of the mold to the ears, because I would much rather have seams to sand than to have a damaged mold or cast. The rubber bands hold these cuts firmly closed so that the mold won't leak, and the zigzag shape makes it mesh together more cleanly than a straight cut. I had some aluminite white resin on hand, so I mixed that up and poured it into the wider slot on the top of the mold for my first cast, which will be a dirty cast, picking up all the dust and dirt and flaky primer left behind after my master was removed. While the very first cast cures, I worked on the head cap mold some more, removing the clay, cleaning up the edges of the mold, adding straws for vents, and brushing everything with petroleum jelly. You can see the head cap mold has two colors going. That's because I poured it and then wasn't positive I'd made the bottom thick enough. I had just a tiny bit of pink silicone left from making Rillen's hands and arms, so I decided to use that up. Since the purple Umu stuff and the pink Alumilite Amazing Mold Rubber are both tin cure silicone, they're compatible and will merge. The pink stuff is softer and less tear resistant, but it's fine for just making the mold a bit thicker on the back side. Unfortunately, the temperature had dropped during the night when the bottom half of the head cap mold was curing, and I ended up having some bubbles around the edges. I'm not super concerned about it because it's on a big round part that's easy to sand, but I figured it was worth mentioning that it happened. Fine finishing like sanding is probably the biggest reason I decided to cast this doll now, even though he isn't perfect. His head was made from a variety of materials, including 3D printed plastic, epoxy clay, and paper clay, and I reached a point where the combination made it too hard to continue to refine the sculpt, because each material needed different tools. Having a head that's solid resin means I can use the same tools and materials on the whole thing while continuing to refine the inside of the head and the neck. So one good resin cast will become my new master if I ever decide to cast this doll again, or have him cast professionally at some point. So after the doll's head has had a whole day to cure, it's time to demold my very first cast of my first ever BJD sculpt. I over-poured a little, so getting the vent stems on his ears out of the mold was a little tricky. One ear had a little bubble, probably because I poured too fast for the air to escape, so on the next pour I'll go a little slower. There are a couple bubbles on the top edge too, but nothing I can't repair. But when the head finally pops out, he's honestly better than I ever imagined he could be. For a dirty cast, this actually turned out great. So that means one huge piece of this customization project is now done, and now I can finally really move forward with this incarnation of Rune's mods. If you're like me and you're excited to see it all come together, make sure you subscribe, because this guy is what I'm planning to focus on for the next couple months, and I can't wait to share my progress. My second cast had stronger seams on the side, but no bubbles at all, and I'm so excited with how this project came out in the end. That's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.